you love a good textbook. Look at his shelf. He loves a good textbook. It was like hundreds of hours on Duolingo. Give yourself a break.
This idea of non-fungible hours, that was a lot of fun. And it spilled over into Yiddish. And so yes.
We are Yiddish hipsters.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you are now just joining us on YouTube, welcome to this channel. My name is Colin Gorey. This is a channel all about languages and all of the wonderful things about languages, like making up your own languages for fiction or studying how languages work, the science of language. And last but not least, language learning, which is going to be the topic of our chat today. We are about to go into an interview with Natasha Lipman. This is actually part 2 of the interview. If you have not seen part 1, go check it out. It is on the channel and there will be a link. And you can sort of get the context and hear the backstory. Right now we are going to be talking all about language learning and how to fit it into your life. A life that no doubt includes all sorts of other commitments, all sorts of things that take up your time and money and energy and attention and focus. How do you put language learning in there? How do you make that happen while you're busy doing other things as well? So I'm going to switch us over to the interview. Welcome back, Natasha.
Hi, long time no see.
Long time no see. So, language learning famously takes a huge amount of time. This is not something that occurs in, a weekend, despite, some clickbait titles on YouTube. You're not going to get to a high degree in a language for time until months, years have passed in some cases. So how do we make this happen? Because, we're all busy people, right? We, jobs, families, all sorts of other things going on in our lives. What's the secret? We're going to promise them a secret. How do you do it?
Wow, I wish I had a secret prepared for this. I will give a little bit of context. I have health issues, which means that my brain doesn't particularly work very well when I want it to work well. And also it means that I'm very limited with what I can do in the day. And this was a really big concern of mine going into trying to learn a language. I think that I would be able to give it the time that it needed to be able to make the progress that made learning the language worth it. The first thing I will say is that learning how to learn a language is really, really, really helpful and really, really important because it made me get much better use out of my time. And I think there are a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to understanding what you want to do with the language and prioritizing, and also thinking about ways to integrate language learning into things that you would do in your day-to-day life. I also think it's really helpful to learn how you learn. So I know that I am not a good self-directed learner. I love learning. I will not sit down with a textbook. You will sit down with the textbook. You love a good textbook. Look at his shelf. Yeah. He loves a good textbook. I will not sit down with a textbook and study a textbook. So I knew that if I have X amount of hours a week that I can give to language learning, I will have as many classes as I can afford within that time. I will do specific things, and I basically have a schedule that I stick to throughout the week where I'm accountable to somebody else because their time is also involved in that. And that has been really, really helpful to me. Even when I was very unwell earlier this year, I would show up to the conversation groups in my pajamas, lying down in bed, looking a right mess, and I would listen. And then something would annoy me, and then I'd sit up and go on a rant about it, which I always find very energy giving, probably not very good for me, but I enjoy it. And so I think it's a combination of all of those things. So we can talk about it however you would like to. This is your stream. So what do you think?
I think that you've brought up several very important points. each of which is worthy of being called a secret. So we're gonna give people multiple secrets today.
Secret one.
Secret one. Um, Secret one is to learn how languages are learned, because then your expectations are going to be set appropriately and you're going to be deploying your time most efficiently. If you, oh, I see you want to say something.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, go for it.
What is the first thing people think about when they want to learn a language now? I'm going to play Duolingo.
Yes.
And I say play very specifically because you think learn a language in 10, 15 minutes a day. It gives you input into that. I don't remember. Do you remember how many? So Duolingo, and we said this earlier in the stream, we started learning Yiddish before it went on Duolingo. So
Yes.
We are Yiddish hipsters.
Yiddish hipsters.
Yiddish hipsters, not by much, but we got there.
Barely.
I don't remember how many hours did they say you needed to get to like B1 or like A2 on Yiddish Duolingo.
Oh.
It was like hundreds of hours on Duolingo to get to like upper beginner, lower intermediate level.
It was, I believe it was upper beginner. We can find the actual stats and put them in the description. But yeah, it was a lot of hours to get to a fairly low level.
And I know we have spent less time than that this year on Yiddish, and we are at a higher level. And I think that's where that to me is a really good highlighting example. That's a bad English sentence. Also, that's a good point to remember just in terms of language learning. When we speak in our native language, we stop, we start, we correct ourselves, we don't say things well, and we get really annoyed at ourselves when we do that in a language that we're learning. But often even in your native language you do that. So give yourself a break.
Give yourself
just
a break.
General advice there. But with something like Duolingo, for me, I know a lot of people really like it, and I know a lot of people find it helpful when they are further along in a language, kind of going back and reinforcing those skills. I could learn to game Duolingo. I never learned anything from Duolingo. And so is the amount of time you have to put in to the game worth it if you only have, say, even if you had an hour a week or 2 hours a week to learn a language? Is doing 10 minutes a day on Duolingo the best use of your time? Is it going to get you to where you're going? And I think this is what's interesting about this conversation is you can say, ideally, to get to X level in X amount of time, people need to be doing X number of hours roughly per week. And I see this a lot in comprehensive input videos on YouTube. For a lot of people, for many of the reasons that you've said, that is absolutely not feasible. And so I think it's really important to remember that whatever amount of time you can give to your language learning, that is great. Even if it's 10 minutes a day. Sometimes all I would do is listen to a 3-minute song once, but I still was keeping the language in my mind. I was thinking about the language. Even if I couldn't dedicate a substantial amount of time to it.
I want to follow up on two things that you mentioned there. One about Duolingo and apps in general, but I think Duolingo is obviously the most popular. And the second one about spending X number of hours. So talk about Duolingo first. I want to first of all say that Duolingo has done something fantastic in making language learning something that is part of so many people's lives. And this is, language learning has a huge, there's a kind of a negative association with language learning for most people, or at least there has been. If you've come up through a system where you had a mandatory second language and you didn't enjoy it, and you probably didn't enjoy it because you didn't get very far in it for the reason that we talked about in the last video, you probably have a bad taste in your mouth for language learning. And I think Duolingo's completely changed that public perception around language learning as something that's kind of fun, lighthearted, memeable. It's really great. But I think what happens is people sort of mistake the tool for the task. And there's that progress bar on Duolingo or whatever app, I don't want to pick on any one, It's all apps. This is not the progress bar of your developing mental representation of that language. They're in some ways quite distinct. And so if you think in the terms of I have 15 minutes a day to spend on this language, the best use of my time is going on Duolingo, you're probably wrong. But this leads into the second point, which is this might be a little cringy, but hours are non-fungible. So what I mean by this is you can't exchange 1 hour for another. So we all know this. We have sort of rhythms during the day. I know that I am very energetic in the morning. In the afternoon, I hit the slump. In the evening, I get energetic again. That's one example. You probably have, everyone listening probably has their own, or watching has their own pattern. An hour spent when you are effective and focused is not the same as an hour spent when you're in the mid-afternoon doldrums. So maybe you don't just have 10 minutes or 15 minutes to spend a day. Maybe you have 10 focused minutes to spend a day, but 30 sort of apathetic or, resting minutes to spend a day. These things can coexist. And one thing that you can do is if say you need to rest for 30 minutes, maybe you could fit in an app into that 30 minutes. And in that case, it's not just 30 minutes of rest, but it's 30 minutes of a particular kind of input that might not be like the gold standard of input, but it can still do something for you. So this idea of non-fungible hours, I don't know, Lucy, if you want to put anything goofy about non-fungible hours in the thumbnail. But this idea of non-fungible hours also holds when it comes to the kinds of input that you're getting. So you may have only 15 minutes a day that you can spend learning the language, but you may also have an hour a day that you spend researching stuff on the internet for whatever reason. If you can do some of that in your other language, do it. That's free. That's like free input, because you had that time that you were going to spend on that anyway. If you're at a level in the language where you can do that, this is this double dipping, which I think is, for me, the secret of fitting language learning into your life. It's that if you have an option to do something in the language, do it in the language. And this obviously becomes more of a possibility as your level increases. By the time you're an upper intermediate speaker of a language, you have new possibilities open to you. If you want to say, I want to read a book, read it in your target language. I want to look up accounting, look it up in your target language. Obviously not every language. If you're learning Hittite, it's probably not, you don't have a lot on UX in Hittite online, but it's something that you can do, and you can double dip. So yeah, you have 15 minutes of language learning time where it's solely for learning the language, and maybe you have an hour that you could also get input in. And because, as we talked about in the last video, input is so important. Once you've centered that in your mind, then new avenues open up for you as to how you can spend time in your day.
Something that I talk about a lot within the context of managing a chronic illness is pacing and how to add in new activities into your life. But I think it's relevant for anyone that is deciding to learn a language, that if you already have a very busy life and you're choosing to learn a language, that time has to come from somewhere. And so you almost have to make a commitment to yourself that I am going to prioritize this as something that I want to do. And as Colin said, finding ways to kind of integrate it into things that you're already going to do is very helpful. But again, if you're a beginner, that can be much more challenging. One of the things we do is we text each other in Yiddish. Even when we were learning the alphabet, we were texting, even with Lucy, I was texting Lucy in English with Yiddish letters to get used to doing those sounds. And that was something that was really, really helpful. And I think it is challenging when you don't feel like you have the time to commit to something, especially, again, as we talked about, I think in the last video, you see people online who are spending hours and hours and hours a day of very focused time learning a language. And I think yeah, it's difficult. Like I would say the majority of this year, the only thing I spent my energy on was language learning. Like I couldn't really do very much. And so the time that I had, that was like my happy structure thing. And the amount of like joy it brought into my life, I can't even explain it. And I think that also helps because if you're doing something that you love, you're going to want to do it and you feel motivated and it makes you feel like you're progressing in something. Even if you're in the intermediate slump, you can notice things changing and you don't have to do something full time. You don't have to do something all the time to find ways to make it work for you. Um, and I think that's the most exciting thing. One thing I did do when I added in another class, like my entire week is planned around my classes, but we have a class together on a Friday. I added a class in a private class on Thursdays because as I said in the last stream, I'm learning with people who have a much higher grasp of German. I have zero grasp of German. So obviously there are things that they know that I don't. So I kind of had to do more work to kind of meet them. Um, and for me, that class time is way more effective than me spending maybe even 4 times that trying to do something on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was also kind of thinking I could afford to do it. I can, um, if I plan around it, I can dedicate this time to it. And then I'm not having to tell myself every day I think the thing I find the hardest is when I'm really tired, I'm not going to pick up a Yiddish book. I'm not going to sit down and do a thing. Um, so being in a place where I know that this is what I'm doing at this time, I'm going to have a way higher quality input, way higher quality learning during that time. And I would say that's probably worth 4 times the weight of time. I'm being really bad with metaphors today. I apologize.
Well, it's like if you spending 4 hours with a furrowed brow looking through a grammar book is probably not going to do as much for you as 1 hour of conversation with someone you like.
Yeah.
And who understands your level and is capable of producing language that is appropriate for you and interesting to you. The magic of a good teacher. Yes, the thing that I know I have these anecdotes or these little ways I like to explain this, but people often try to white knuckle it. They try and use willpower to, no, I'm going to sit down every day and I'm going to spend 15 minutes a day and I'm going to be writing out verb charts and things like this. And I don't want to say that can't work. Maybe it can. It can't work for me. And even though I'm a huge nerd and I have all sorts of textbooks here that I read for fun, dictionaries, looking up etymologies, this kind of thing, that's not something that I do out of willpower. That's something that you might compare to a bad habit. It's a habit. Whether it's bad or not, I'll leave for the world to judge. For history will judge whether it's a bad habit or not. But it's not something that I have to try to do. It's something that I'd have to try not to do. And there are those things. Whoever you are, whatever you do, whatever you like to do, there are things that you actually have to exert willpower to stop doing. And if you can find a way to align those things with content in the language, in your target language, then you have found the secret to learning a language. And it is a bit of a moving target because your ability changes and grows with time. But if you can find that thing for right now, where you just really want to do it and you just keep doing it, and it's in that target language, you will advance. And you will look back 6 months from now and think, I had a really good 6 months doing, whatever it is I do. And as a side effect, I know this language a lot better than I used to.
And you might have made new friends that you never would have met, which I think has been a really nice part of this, that we've got to meet some really great people. I love the fact that so many of the people are much older. That brings me so much joy. And it's become a lifestyle for us. But like actually it kind of has. which has been really lovely. That, yeah, I don't know, it makes me very happy.
Especially when you're learning a language that's not so commonly learned or taught, so, or say a minority language or something like that, you instantly have something in common with everyone else who's learning it or teaching it. Whereas, say a very commonly taught language like Spanish, if you meet someone else who's studying Spanish, it's kind of like, oh yeah, hey, cool, those AR verbs, right? Por y para, what's going on there, right? You don't have a lot to talk about necessarily. There's nothing super in common about the two of you from that. However, if you find someone else who happens to be studying Yiddish, that
Heritage languages.
heritage
Everyone has a
languages,
story.
everyone has
That's
a
what's so
story.
nice about it. Yeah. And you
Exactly.
get to hear like the whole family history, and but then that also links into wider conversations about who spoke this language in their family, where were they? Um yeah, it's a very it opens up wider conversations, even if you're immediately just talking to somebody. And somebody put in the chat, I couldn't see because it was blurry. I think it was probably Lucy, about anime and
Oh,
Japanese.
definitely Lucy.
Do you
Yeah.
want to
So
pick up on that?
so that's one thing that's so they may not bond over Japanese, but they bond over maybe the reason that they're learning Japanese, and so that can also happen. Um, the the I want to pick up on what you said about everyone has a story when they're learning a language. When I was um, in the Isle of Skye doing some research, we were doing research with Scottish Gaelic speakers, and that's another heritage language of mine. And okay, I'll pause my story. People who learn Spanish definitely deserve respect.
And there are
Absolutely.
many heritage learners of Spanish too.
That's true. That's true. But 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 going back to the story about the Isle of Skye. So we were doing research with speakers of Scottish Gaelic, and we this is a heritage language of mine. 5-6 generations back, maybe even 4 generations back. Actually, my ancestors, some of them would have spoken Gaelic, and so we went to Skye and started talking to people, and I had my tiny little embryonic level of Gaelic, and instantly the conversation was, oh, who are your grandparents? Oh, I think oh, the Fergusons. Oh yeah, Ferguson. Oh, from yeah, and then. Oh, wasn't he a minister? I think he was, and didn't he have a brother? And it was just, and I had never met this person before in my life. I knew nothing about this person, and yet here we were having a conversation about my great uncle or something like that. And so it was an amazing connection that never would have occurred otherwise.
That's really nice.
Yeah, it's so nice. I people want to be able to place you in their world, right? And when you are talking about a smaller community on the world stage, then that's possible. So that's kind of cool.
What was secret number 2? I don't remember what order and what I said.
I don't know anything about order, but let's see. So secret number 1 was, I don't remember the order. I'm just gonna make up an order. Okay. Double dipping.
Bang for your buck.
Bang for your buck. So do
These
things
are
you would
all,
do.
yeah.
Do things you would do in the language anyway. Um, know how languages are learned. Let that orient how you go about spending your time, and then fuel yourself with interest. I think those are the
I have
rather
a
than
new
willpower.
one.
You have a new one. Number 4. Number
Number
4.
4. Number 4. This is how I would say it to myself: get over yourself. In the sense in the sense that I was going in, I was so nervous, and I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to be wrong. And like, I literally had my teacher write down and email me how to say, I am a beginner, I don't know how to speak, I'm just here to listen. It's until you start actually kind of letting go of some of that fear and being comfortable with being wrong. Like our teacher says to us all the time, stop apologizing. We do not apologize here. And I think that's really important. Like you're going to make a fool of yourself when you learn to speak another language. It's the same like a lot of languages, when you say I'm hot in English, you end up saying I'm horny, right? Like that is just how a lot of these languages work. And you'll never forget that once you've done it for the first time. It's actually a really beneficial tool in the language learning process because you're never going to get that wrong again because you were embarrassed or potentially embarrassed. The first time that happened to me in France, I was very embarrassed. But it took a really long time for me to kind of get to a place where I was like, it's okay not to know these things because I'm here to learn. That's the point. You have to learn by making mistakes. You have to, and I think where it can be difficult with language learning is it's how we communicate. And it is a very frustrating thing if you can't express yourself the way you want to express yourself. And so it's a lot more personal than, say, if you're playing the piano. um like I have a similar thing with singing, that if I don't sound how I want to sound for whatever reason, I get really like frustrated and upset. And because I'm now like untrained for years and years and years, I don't sound the way I want to sound, and so I don't want to sing in front of anyone. And it's taken all the fun out of singing for me because I'm so focused on getting my voice back that I'm not doing it for fun. And I think that's a really like, to me, that's a very good parallel to language learning because you're kind of getting in your own way by wanting to be perfect. But something you said in the last stream, like I know people who have been learning a language for a very long time and they still feel like they have a long way to go with it. It is not a language learn a language is for life, not just for Christmas. If it's a language or Hanukkah, I suppose. If you want to truly learn a language, you have to be okay with saying, I've been doing it for a year. A year is a long time to be doing something consistently. I could say I have many, many years ahead of me to get to a place where I would be comfortable saying that like I'm anywhere near like someone should listen to about Yiddish. um, it's it's yeah. I think that's my main point.
It's tough with the second language because the state of your mental representation of the language is maybe equivalent to someone who, I don't know, is 3 or 4 years old. But your thoughts and your sophistication are, 30 something years old, right? So how do you manage that gap? You know you're capable of more. You have all these kind of things about philosophy and the world and politics and history and chemistry and geography that you want to talk about. And you can't because you're still at this, I am good. I like books. This kinds of thing. You can't really say the most profound and interesting things that you want to say. And so that frustration that comes from that gap is something that has to be managed because that frustration tends to have this effect of turning off your ability to acquire. And so just kind of be okay. You have to become okay with it.
I find it actually quite fun trying to find ways to talk about more complex things in a simpler way. Like we had, and this was actually months ago, maybe it was like halfway through the year, I don't remember. We had a conversation about different philosophies. We had a piece of paper with like Rousseau
Yeah,
and
and working out like Jean Jacques Rousseau. Oh,
ah, and
Rousseau.
then you can understand the translation of like the most famous parts of that. And then we were having a conversation about what we thought of these philosophies and these approaches, and we couldn't do it in the way that we could in English, but we could simplify it enough to be understood. And I think this was something that was really helpful, was I can still make myself understood even if I can't say exactly what I would say in English, or if I don't get everything grammatically correct. Um, and kind of, I will say I still get very angry about grammar every week, mostly when I have to learn it. But um, and you've even said this to me, like I'm starting to use the dative correctly without thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so those things come with time and kind of getting to a place where you can accept this is where I am right now. I can say way more than I could. I couldn't speak the language last year. Now I can speak for like hours in Yiddish and I can be understood and I can understand. And that's only going to get better with time. And I've stopped worrying. But I suppose it's also because we're doing it in private contexts. Like I think it would be very different if you said to me, let's have a Yiddish conversation now, I'd be so nervous.
Yeah.
That I couldn't do it.
I feel the same way. I would have to steel myself up for that.
We have an environment where we are all allowed to be wrong and we can be corrected and we can take that correction without feeling like we have done something wrong. And I think that's really important. Like, I really like the way that we are corrected when we are speaking. Oh God, this is going to turn into like a Gustavo Stan thing again. But he often will repeat what we're saying, but kind of correct it. So he'll kind of tell us back what we've said to him, but like tweaking. So it didn't feel like we were constantly being stopped with, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong. It became part of the wider conversation, and that helped me anyway to feel less like I was being corrected.
And regarding correction in general, language acquirers are notoriously indifferent or resistant to correction. In other words, think of children when they learn languages, when they're acquiring their first language. They'll say things that are not adult-like in their grammar, and the parents may correct the child, say, give the adult-like form. He eated, he ate, and the kid will keep saying he eated, he eated, he eated, until one day he says he ate. And it's not the correction that appears anyway to do that. It's just the growth of this representation of the language internally. And so I think, the research on correction in the second language acquisition context, I don't know well enough to, expound on, but I don't think it's very central. And I think just about any way of doing it that doesn't make people feel bad and shut off is good.
It's really funny with Yiddish because in English we just say time for like o'clock time and the first time. Whereas in Yiddish we have two words. You can have sight and mol, and every time I use sight for everything. And every time Sebastian pops up next to me and goes, mol, I'm like, oh yeah. I started to do that to myself after I have said it.
But can I interrupt to say, look, there's a
yes.
very clear distinction between, this is the distinction in action between acquired language and learned language. You can talk consciously about the difference between sight and mol. You could even become a linguist and write a paper about it. It does not mean that you can actually, that your representation
my brain pulls
it
out when I need it.
Will produce
it.
Yeah. And it's just so striking. Because I know mol and mol. But one day, it is going to happen that sight and mol will become separate in your mind. Or temps and fois if you're speaking French, tiempo and base if you're speaking Spanish. Lots of languages make this distinction. They will unfuse and they'll become two separate things in your mind, and then you'll never make that mistake again, probably, maybe.
So we went from 1 to new 4.
Yeah.
In our tips for busy, tired people that want to learn a language. Let's go back in time to whatever you now deem to be 2.
I do not remember the order for these at all. These are just coming out.
I don't even remember what I said. So if you can remember what I said, that's
coming out of the ether. So we have learn how languages are learned, double dip if possible, use interest rather than willpower, and those are the first 3, and then we had our 4.
But I think all of those things were part of 1.
Well, 1A, 1B.
1A,
depends
1B.
on how you count them.
The time has to come from somewhere. That's an important one we talked about.
The time has to come from somewhere. And okay, so I want to take this opportunity to talk to those people in our audience, you know who you are, who are tempted to learn more than one language at a time. I am one of you. I am the worst. I'm not the worst, but I'm up there.
You're the
Um,
worst. It's fine.
I'm the worst, and now everybody knows it. The thing is, there is a way to do it. This is kind of advanced tactics, I think. Um, don't start, your first serious input-based learning experience of a language, and then another one at the same time. Don't do that. I wouldn't recommend it. But once you've gone through, say, a year of an input-based approach, then you may feel tempted to add another language, and you can do it. I think you will find your limit as to how many languages you can sort of build up at a time. My limit is 2. I think 2 and 1 maintenance language. But the nice thing is the double dipping principle applies here. So the reason I suggested staggering and not learning 2 languages from the ground up at a time is that the activities that you do in a language where your level is low are different from the activities you do in a language where your level is intermediate or high. And double dipping is much, much more possible when you get to an intermediate, upper intermediate level in a language. That means when you're curious about, this sort of bug that you saw in your garden, you can go look it up in Portuguese. Maybe. You can start doing these things. You can start living parts of your life in that language. And then you can save the time that's just for learning a language, just the sort of, I'm sitting down and I'm getting a little bit of input that I wouldn't normally read, but I'm doing it to learn the language. That can be saved for the language where your level is low. And so you can do this kind of thing where you have the 1 at a low level, 1 at a higher level, and you can portion your time that way. But you're not going to be able to get around one fact, which is that you have 24 hours in the day. And, yes, there are non-fungible hours, but only to a certain extent. And you can't make time appear out of nowhere. And so you're going to have to subdivide it, and you're going to be slower as a result.
Or you can be really smart and do what I'm doing and learning a related language after a year in the language.
Okay, so now we're getting from advanced tactics to super hyper advanced tactics.
Which is funny because I'm not super hyper advanced in anything to do with language learning. But I've actually been finding it very interesting because Sebastian and I have just started learning Hebrew with our Yiddish teacher, who is teaching us Hebrew in Yiddish instead of English. And weirdly, it feels very natural. And there are a lot of things in Hebrew that are going to help with our Yiddish and vice versa. And so it's almost like broadening out and giving us more of a context. But crucially, Yiddish is going to be our main language. Hebrew is like a fun addition that we are doing more casually. We are not trying to catch up with Hebrew. We are not kind of replacing Yiddish with Hebrew. Something that we talked about a lot was like when you were in a bit of a Yiddish slump, you had like one chat in Ladino and it just like reignited your love for Yiddish. And so it's kind of using your excitement of being a beginner in another language to fuel the second language that you're learning.
This is so strange. I mean, I can't believe that this actually worked. But the story is I'd been in my Yiddish learning process maybe 6-7 months. Definitely had hit the intermediate plateau. Didn't have a lot that I was super interested in reading or consuming in Yiddish at the time. Also, it was 2021 and it was a bit of a disaster year in a lot of ways. And so, things were, I don't know, my energy level for Yiddish was at a low ebb. And one thing that I did was I just kept doing what I was doing, kept up my classes, kept the language in my life, even though I wasn't doing much outside of class, wasn't reading a lot, I wasn't doing any formal study or anything like that. But I'd come to the class, I'd come to a conversation group or two when I had the time and the schedule worked. I just waited. I kept the language in my life and waited for something to happen. And inevitably something did happen, which was I had I was lucky enough to have a chance to have a class in Ladino, and because I have a decently high level in Spanish, I was able to get the input in Ladino and respond in Spanish, and that was a lot of fun. And that experience of just casually dabbling in another language reignited my my love for language learning, and it spilled over into Yiddish. And so I thought, whoa, turns out that the way to, rekindle my passion for learning Yiddish was to go and learn another language for a day. And weirdly, I have heard other people talk about this. So it seems to be something that, at least it's not just me. There are other people who are like this, and maybe you're one of these people. So if you're at a
That's what
point,
I'm trying.
right? So I don't know if you were at an ebb in your energy, but it can work. And if you are coming into this, it's now January 2022, and you are looking at your New Year's resolutions and you're thinking, this is the year that I really get back to French or Russian or Swahili or whatever it is, maybe you can sprinkle in something else and try and reignite that passion, because your interest is going to ebb and flow. You're doing something that takes years, and you cannot keep up the same level of intensity and excitement for years. You have to approach this as something that you manage, you husband your interest and energy over time, and this is one way of doing that.
Your story reminded me of point 5, which I would like to now add to the list. And again, this is something that I've talked about a lot just generally in terms of living with long-term health conditions, but I think it's really relevant for anybody, especially during our current times. Life happens. Life makes it really hard to concentrate on things, and life will impact your ability to learn a language at certain times. And that is normal, and that is okay. And it is, I had very long periods of time where I was not making progress, and I don't just think it was the intermediate plateau, and I think it was the same for you. And it's one of those things where on certain topics, I've been going over them again and again. Like, I will have a class with my teacher, and then we'll do the same thing again, like a few weeks later, and we'll approach it in different ways, because I know that I've not been able to give it the time and the brain space it needs to be able to go into my head. So, for example, with our reading, we all seem to have clicked with reading recently, but we weren't able to give it much time outside of our class to do the reading. But because it was a new alphabet, we actually needed to get more practice of that reading in, but we just didn't have the energy or the time to be able to do that. And I think while we're talking about like the ebb and flow of motivation, we also have to talk about the ebb and flow of life generally, and the impact that that will make on your language learning. And that when you're tired, you're going to find it hard to produce what you think you can produce in the class. You're not going to have the energy or motivation to read something on your own. And that is why I am very dependent on having structured things with other people, because I know that if I had to like motivate myself, even though I'm very motivated to learn the language, when I'm tired, I'm not going to do it. Like, that's just the way it is. And so we were getting more input together, for example, by saying, okay, let's just have a call where we'll talk to each other about our day in Yiddish. And that was a nice way for us, while we were both in a bit of a Yiddish slump, to be able to kind of get through that. And so especially, last year, this year, hopefully that will be it. That, life happens, and that is going to impact your language learning. It's the same thing as when you're tired, you might become really bloody grumpy. Your emotions, how you're feeling, the weather, someone stressed you out, your job is annoying, all of these things are going to impact your language learning. And I think appreciating that and going with the flow and being a bit, I hate the term be kind to yourself, but it makes the most sense here. And being kind to yourself and implementing and understanding that with everything else that we've talked about in this video is really, really important.
Yeah, be kind to yourself in the sense that you can understand where you're coming from. You can understand where you're coming from. Crazy stuff's going on. It's having an impact. You wouldn't expect it. Knowing what you know about what's going on in your life, do you expect yourself to be progressing at the same rate? No. And I don't know. People sometimes do need permission to do that to them, to treat themselves in this way, which I think is a pretty not only kind but also quite rational way. But it's hard, and I don't always do it to myself. So yes, not that you need anyone's permission, but if you want it, you got it.
You have our blessing.
You have our blessing. So I see we're coming sort of close to the end of our time here. Is there anything that you want to kind of sum up and tell the people?
Learning a language has been the best thing I've done in a very, very long time. And I think being able to find ways to do it that took into consideration the fact that life also happens and I do not have to sit and study. It can be something that I do for fun, and it's not something that I have a goal that by X time I need to have achieved something, and it's not something I have to commercialize. Is although we have started a project based on it, but that's fun. If we that it's been very eye-opening for me, which is why I think we're talking about this, because so many of these things, once you learn it, seem really basic and fundamental. And as I said in the last stream, I feel almost a bit robbed that it took me until I was 32 to learn how to learn, and that I can do it even when I can't dedicate a lot of time to something. And I think that is a message that leads very nicely into a little project that we are doing.
Yes. So if you like the kind of attitude and sort of philosophy that we bring to language learning, you may also be interested in a newsletter that we have, which is called How Do You Say? It is available on Substack, howdoyousay.substack.com. The link will be in the description. And essentially what it is it's an attempt to bring all of this stuff that we've been talking about in these conversations that we've had today, as well as on social media over the past year, and all these things that we've been trying to tell people about language learning into one place and to make it accessible. Because I know I can be guilty of this. I can get technical and I can go off onto tangents about verb phrases and things like that. And fortunately, I have Natasha here, who understands
does
more.
Not care about verb phrases.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to say it in a nice way, but yeah, no, does not care about verb phrases, and will send me very, very angry messages if I mention the dative case. So it's a grounded approach, and it's really aimed at people who are trying to get started learning a language, but they don't have 8 hours a day to spend doing flashcards and things like that. It's for the sort of the part-time language learner, which I think we all have to be. It's an attempt to sort of bring some science-based advice along with what we've learned in our own experience to everyone in one place. And it's free. It's weekly.
It's delightful.
It's delightful.
It's methodical.
We'll let you be the judge of whether it's delightful, but it is methodical. And it's meant to take you from just not knowing anything about how languages are learned to becoming a seasoned pro at input-based approaches, which are the ones that tend to work.
So please subscribe.
Yep, there's the thumb.
There's the thumb. But yes, and I just do want to say that Colin has been like my personal language therapist over the last year, and especially at the beginning of last year. And it has been a complete language life-changing experience. And I'm very grateful for that. So yeah, I'll just be sappy for a minute.
Oh.
But it is true.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Natasha, and I'd like to also thank all of our viewers who came on live today and could join us. We really appreciate the chance to talk to everyone about all this sort of language learning stuff, and it's great to know that so many of you out there are interested too. So I suppose that is all from us for today. Thank you so much for joining, and if you're watching this later on YouTube, thank you for watching so far into the video. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you enjoyed. And if you do like this kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. The bell thing, do the bell thing, whatever that is, and you will hear all about when new stuff comes out about language learning, linguistics, constructed languages, all sorts of language related goodness. So with that, we will leave you. Thank you again, and good afternoon,
Evening.
evening, wherever, whatever it is, wherever you are. Bye bye.